Welcome to Long Story Short. Have you ever heard of the First World War in human history? Nope. Probably not the one you're thinking of. No trenches, no gas masks, no awkward Christmas ceasefires in muddy fields. Instead, this was a global punch-up fought across 5 continents between empires who couldn't agree on, well, pretty much anything. 7 years of battles, betrayals, and big egos. Welcome to the 7 Years' War. Picture Europe around 1750. It's a giant game of musical chairs, but with armies. Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Spain are all trying to grab land, power, and colonies. Nobody really trusts anybody. Tensions are already high from a messy conflict called the War of Austrian Succession, but things explode when alliances shift in what's called the Diplomatic Revolution of 1756. Suddenly, old enemies are friends, and old friends are enemies. Britain teams up with Prussia, France sides with Austria, Russia and Spain get involved too. At the same time, there's another problem: colonies. In North America, British settlers keep pushing west, and French forts keep popping up to block them. In India, British and French trading companies are turning trade disputes into shooting wars. Long story short, you've got a powder keg in Europe and colonies full of sparks ready to ignite. When war finally breaks out in 1756, it doesn't just stay in Europe. It explodes across the entire planet. This is why some historians call it the first true world war. Let's start in Europe. Picture Frederick the Great of Prussia. Short, intense, and with the kind of confidence that makes you both admire him and wonder if he's just a little insane. Prussia at the time is a small kingdom, surrounded by giants. Austria, France, and Russia all team up to wipe him off the map. Everyone expects Prussia to collapse in, 5 minutes. But Frederick? He's not playing by their rules. He marches his tiny but brutally disciplined army around like a chessboard, outmaneuvering forces several times his size. He's brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely refuses to quit. At one point, after a brutal defeat, he even considered eating a bullet himself, but instead, he came back swinging. That's Frederick, drama king and war machine rolled into one. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another war is brewing, the French and Indian War. Quick clarification, that name is misleading. It's not the French against the Indians. It's Britain and its colonists versus France and a network of indigenous nations. For the French, allies like the Huron and Algonquin were vital. They knew the forests, rivers, and mountain passes. They could ambush, scout, and vanish in terrain that left European soldiers bumbling around like lost tourists. Meanwhile, the powerful Iroquois Confederacy tried to walk a razor's edge, playing both sides to keep control of their lands. Indigenous nations weren't side characters in this story. They were central players, trying to defend their world against 2 European empires clawing at it. Hop over to India, and things get even wilder. Here, it's not kings fighting, it's corporations. The British East India Company versus the French Compagnie des Indes. Imagine Apple and Microsoft, but with cannons, muskets, and armies of tens of thousands. Both sides are throwing money at local rulers, switching alliances, and fighting battles that will decide who controls India's trade routes, some of the most profitable in the world. Spoiler, the British win, and this is where their empire in India really begins. And then there's the Caribbean. Forget tropical paradise. This is a sugar-fueled battleground. Sugar in the 18th century was like oil today, insanely profitable, driving economies and worth killing for. Britain and France send fleets to blast each other's ships and seize islands like Guadeloupe and Martinique. These islands may look tiny on a map, but they're economic jackpots. Whoever holds them controls rivers of wealth. And finally, even West Africa feels the shockwaves. Forts along the Gold Coast and beyond are attacked, because whoever dominates those outposts dominates the Atlantic slave trade. The war doesn't just skim across continents, it digs right into the brutal machinery of empire and human bondage. So when people call the 7 Years' War the First World War, they're not exaggerating. From Berlin to Bengal, from the Ohio Valley to the sugar islands of the Caribbean, the globe is on fire. It's not just kings and generals fighting for territory. It's a war that touches indigenous hunters, enslaved Africans, poor European peasants, and wealthy merchants alike. This isn't just a European squabble anymore. It's a planet-sized war. By the early 1760s, things are looking grim for some players. Let's hit the highlights. First stop, Europe. Poor Frederick the Great. By 1762, the guy is done. His once feared Prussian army is battered, half his kingdom is occupied, and his enemies are basically circling like sharks. Everyone's expecting the Great in his name to turn into the Late. And then, boom. Plot twist. Russia suddenly switches sides. Why? Because Tsar Peter III takes the throne, and Peter is, no exaggeration, a Frederick superfan. The guy had portraits of Frederick in his room and dressed up in Prussian uniforms for fun. So instead of finishing Prussia off, Russia makes peace, and Frederick gets to keep fighting. Historians literally call it the miracle of the House of Brandenburg, because without that fanboy Tsar, no offense, Prussia would have been toast. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Britain finally decides to go all in. Enter William Pitt the Elder, Britain's prime minister and basically the hype man of the empire. Pitt pours money, soldiers, and ships into North America like he's trying to win the Super Bowl. And it works. In 1759 comes the big one. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham outside Quebec. It's dramatic, it's bloody, and both commanding generals, Britain's James Wolfe and France's Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, are killed in action. Wolfe becomes a national hero back in Britain, immortalized in paintings, while Montcalm gets a cathedral funeral in Quebec. But the bigger point? With Quebec gone, France's grip on Canada starts slipping through its fingers. Now let's hop to India. Here's where a man named Robert Clive, one of history's most controversial figures, steps into the spotlight. At the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Clive wins not just with cannons and muskets, but with good old-fashioned bribery. He straight up buys off local commanders, and when the fighting starts, half the enemy army just sits it out. That victory sets the stage for Britain's dominance in Bengal, the richest region of India, and kicks off what will eventually become the British Raj. And then there's Spain. They join the war late, thinking they'll cash in on some easy French support. Spoiler, they do not. Spain gets wrecked. They lose Florida to Britain, and in exchange, France tosses them Louisiana like a consolation prize, basically saying, sorry we dragged you into this mess, here's some swampland. So, by the mid-1760s, the tide has clearly turned. Britain is stacking up wins on land and sea, while France and its allies are bleeding out. The global scoreboard is tilting fast, and the map of the world is about to be redrawn. So, after 7 years of fighting literally everywhere, it finally ends in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. On paper, Britain is the undisputed winner. Their empire is suddenly enormous. They take Canada from France, secure dominance in India, scoop up islands in the Caribbean, and even grab Florida from Spain. It's like they just hit the jackpot on the imperial slot machine. France? Absolutely gutted. They lose almost all of their North American empire, though they cling desperately to a few sugar islands in the Caribbean, places like Martinique and Guadeloupe. Fun fact, at the time, many Europeans thought sugar was actually more valuable than Canada. Imagine that. Paris was basically saying, sure, you can have the snow and beavers. We'll keep the rum. But France doesn't forget this humiliation. In fact, they make a quiet promise. Revenge will come later. And oh boy, it does, in the form of the American Revolution. France jumps in to help the colonists, sending guns, money, ships, and troops. Historians widely agree that without French support, the American Revolution probably wouldn't have succeeded. And as we talk about Britain's downfall, here's the kicker. Victory nearly bankrupts them. Wars are expensive, and this one left Britain buried under mountains of debt. To fix that, London looks at its colonies and basically says, hey America, time to chip in. Cue the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, and a whole chain of taxes that spark fury across the 13 colonies. Within a decade, angry colonists are tossing tea into Boston Harbor and shouting, no taxation without representation. So, in a weird twist, the 7 Years' War didn't just redraw maps, it lit the fuse for the American Revolution. Meanwhile, in North America, there's another group Britain betrays, Indigenous nations. Many had fought alongside both the French and the British, often under promises that their lands would be protected after the war. But the ink on the Treaty of Paris is barely dry when Britain starts ignoring those agreements. The result? Pontiac's Rebellion in 1763, a massive indigenous uprising that nearly wipes out British forts across the Great Lakes. Britain eventually crushes it, but instead of making peace, they tighten control over Western lands, angering both indigenous peoples and American colonists who wanted to expand westward. And then there's France again. The sting of losing Canada and being humiliated on the world stage lingers for decades. Economically, it strains their finances. Emotionally, it bruises their pride. By the time the French Revolution rolls around in 1789, you can still hear echoes of the defeat in 1763. Losing the 7 Years' War didn't just cost them territory, it shook their identity as a global power. So, the Treaty of Paris doesn't just end a war, it leaves behind a massive, messy legacy. An angry France, a broke Britain, betrayed indigenous nations, and American colonists on the path to rebellion. In short, the war is over, but the aftershocks are just getting started. The 7 Years' War wasn't just a war, it was a global reset. It ended French power in North America, expanded British power across the world, and redrew the map of empires. It also planted the seeds for future explosions: American independence, Indian colonization, French Revolution, and a colonial world order that lasted for centuries. Long before the world wars of the 20th century, this was the first real global conflict. People fought, traded, and died across 5 continents. And when it ended, the world was never the same. And that's the long story short. A world war before anyone called it that. A fight over empires, and a reminder that sometimes victory can come with a whole lot of future headaches. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, drop a comment, or just impress your friends by casually mentioning the Treaty of Paris. See you next time.